You've seen the 7-Eleven logo countless times, but there's something slightly off about it that most people never spot. Once you notice it, you can't unsee it. The odd detail looks like a mistake, yet it might be one of the reasons the brand feels so familiar and recognizable. And here's where it gets stranger. By 2025, 7-Eleven operates over 85,000 stores worldwide and is still aggressively expanding. What could a design quirk and a risky business pivot have in common? Once we look closer at that logo, the answer starts to explain everything. The logo that breaks the rules. If you take a moment to really look at the 7-Eleven logo, you'll notice something unusual. The word 11 is written in sturdy capital letters, except for the final N, which is lowercase. It seems out of place, almost like a mistake. But it was. The detail actually came from a deliberate choice. John P. Thompson S.R.'s wife suggested softening the logo by ending with a lowercase letter, believing it gave the design a friendlier feel. That small change survived year after year, until it became an inseparable part of the brand's look. Designers usually prize balance and order in logos. Most iconic brands lean into perfect symmetry or carefully aligned proportions because our brains naturally like consistency. 7-Eleven ignored those instincts. Instead of neat uniformity, it left a tiny irregularity built into its identity. And the strange part, that's what people remember. Psychologists have shown that irregular details stick in memory more effectively than uniform patterns. In other words, the lowercase n isn't a flaw at all. It works precisely because it breaks many of the rules designers usually treat as sacred. Imagine if the n were capitalized to match the rest of the word. The logo would feel colder, stiffer, and interchangeable with countless mid-century brands. Instead, the softer letter makes it approachable, almost hinting at handwritten warmth tucked into a rigid corporate mark. That single character shifts the tone of the entire design, guiding how people feel about the store before they even walk inside. Over time, repetition reinforces that effect. Once the logo is seen thousands of times, the odd letter no longer feels strange, it feels right. It becomes the familiar face you spot among a crowd, recognizable precisely because of its imperfection. And crucially, 7-Eleven never tried to fix it. They kept the identity consistent while so many other companies stumbled in redesigns. That unwillingness to smooth away every quirk is powerful. Other brands have learned the hard way what happens when they tamper with visual identity. Gap updated its logo in 2010, and the backlash forced a reversal in a matter of days. Tropicana redesigned its packaging so dramatically that sales plunged 20% in just a few weeks. Customers weren't rejecting the new designs because they were bad in isolation. They rejected them because they disrupted familiarity. By holding on to its lowercase n, 7-Eleven didn't just preserve consistency, it created loyalty through recognition. The psychology behind it is simple. Our brains flag unusual details as worth remembering. If everything looks predictable, it fades into the background. But introduce a small disruption, like a lowercase letter in an otherwise uppercase word, and suddenly you've got a mental hook. This explains why the supposed imperfection in the logo strengthens recall. The very detail that looks wrong is the one that secures its place in memory. The impact goes even further than design. This mindset, treating bold irregularity as a strength, shows up in how 7-Eleven has operated for decades. Just as the logo stands out by breaking expectation, the company built its business by ignoring retail conventions. Stores stayed open when others closed. Shelves stocked goods you didn't expect at a small ice dock. Even in later years, major structural changes shifted the company in unorthodox directions. Repeatedly, what might have looked like risky or even awkward moves turned into defining advantages. There's also a cultural angle to the logo's survival. In the early 20th century, design movements revolved around strict geometry and modernist order. Every shape was clean, squared, and deliberate. A stray lowercase letter would have clashed with that ideal. Yet 7-Eleven kept it, proving that what mattered wasn't geometric precision, but recognizability from across a busy street. The imperfection was easier to see, easier to process at a glance, and therefore more useful in advertising than some polished but sterile design. Think of how children remember details about characters, maybe a crooked grin or a mismatched feature. The lowercase n does the same thing for adults scanning storefronts. It adds a subtle quirk that sets it apart, planting itself in memory without conscious effort. That's why branding experts today call it a distinctive mark rather than a mistake. Nearly a century later, the enduring presence of that lowercase letter proves its value. You'll still find it glowing in neon signs from Tokyo to Dallas, printed on coffee cups, snack wrappers, and storefront windows. It no longer feels peculiar because it has become the signature of a massive global retailer. And while designers may nitpick its visual imbalance, the fact remains, few logos have demonstrated such staying power. Today, with over 85,000 stores worldwide, the scale of 7-Eleven's reach only underlines how effective its branding has been. The lowercase n isn't just a typographic quirk. It reflects a deeper attitude that often guided the brand's greatest breakthroughs, a willingness to disregard conventions when those conventions stand in the way of customer connection. Over and over across its history, what looked like an error or a gamble ended up reshaping how the company grew. That broader theme begins to appear when you move away from the sign outside and toward the business itself. Because long before the 7-Eleven name ever existed, the company behind it was making decisions that seemed offbeat, even careless, yet turned out to reshape an entire industry. And the earliest story doesn't revolve around branding or logos at all. It starts with something far more ordinary. From ice blocks to midnight errands. In 1927, a small Dallas-based company called Southland Ice was focused on one thing: selling large blocks of ice to households that relied on iceboxes to keep food fresh. There was nothing glamorous about the business. Customers would pull up in wagons or trucks, load heavy blocks, and head home to preserve their milk or meat for another day. At the time, this seemed routine. Grocery stores handled food, dairies handled milk, and ice plants handled ice. No one saw Southland as anything more than a supplier in a rigid system. But on the ground, something different was beginning to take shape. One employee, John Jefferson Uncle Johnny Green, noticed what executives did not. Working day to day around the ice house, he heard customers talk about groceries they had forgotten: milk, bread, eggs, things they couldn't buy at night because stores closed early. In the 1920s, this was just accepted reality. If you needed something after hours, you waited until morning. Ice companies weren't supposed to solve that problem. But Uncle Johnny saw a simple opportunity hiding in plain sight. People were already at the counter for ice. Why not give them the other basics they were asking for? Uncle Johnny didn't keep the observation to himself. He brought it to Joe C. Thompson SR, who was helping lead Southland at the time. Instead of dismissing the suggestion as unrealistic or distracting from the real business, Thompson supported the experiment. The idea blurred the lines between industries, but shelves at the ice houses soon carried more than frozen blocks. Alongside them appeared milk, bread, and eggs, the most common things people found themselves without late at night. That combination of products didn't just extend sales. It met an urgent need in a way no other business was willing to. This moment wasn't the result of corporate research or industry trend reports. It was observation translated into action. Green provided the spark, and Thompson had the willingness to try something unconventional. That pairing, humble frontline insight combined with leadership support, transformed the company's trajectory. Southland Ice was no longer just another supplier of frozen water. Almost by accident, it became the first business to function as what we now call a convenience store. The difference between the old model and the new one was stark. Ice sales were seasonal and entirely dependent on a single product. Families bought what they needed, but once refrigerators became affordable, demand would inevitably collapse. By introducing staples, Southland discovered something more resilient. People always forgot the milk, always ran out of bread, always needed a last-minute purchase. Instead of waiting until the next day, they could now take care of those needs in the same stock. The focus shifted from ice to convenience itself. Customers embraced it immediately. Families appreciated the flexibility of buying essentials late in the evening, and demand grew beyond the original experiment. Shelves expanded from just a few perishables into an assortment of small groceries. Each edition reinforced the same insight. People valued time and accessibility over rigid retail categories. What mattered wasn't whether they were at a grocery store or an ice plant. It was whether they could solve their problem quickly. That seemingly small pivot carried cultural weight. In the 1920s, the rhythm of shopping was dictated by store hours. If your local grocer shut its doors at 6, your household went without until morning. Southland broke the pattern. By staying open later and stocking needed goods, it showed customers that life didn't have to be organized around everyone else's schedule. The late-night purchase, once impossible, was suddenly an option. For everyday families, that shift was transformative. The operational work behind this change should not be underestimated. Adding perishable goods like milk and bread required refrigeration, organization, and reliable supply partnerships. But those logistical hurdles were worth it because they turned ice houses into neighborhood stops. What had been a plain industrial site became a local resource, a place families integrated into daily routines. Without ever planning to, Southland had stumbled into a new kind of business logic. The value of convenience outweighed tradition. Historians now point to this decision, the moment Uncle Johnny's idea was greenlit. as the practical beginning of the global convenience store industry. The brand did not yet carry the 7-Eleven name and had no stripes or neon signage, but the core identity was already forming. It was no longer about supplying one commodity. It was about solving whatever a customer needed at the moment they needed it. That mindset resonated in 1927, and it still defines the company nearly a century later. The legacy of that experiment is easy to measure today. What began inside a single Southland ice location evolved into a retail category, operating over 85,000 stores worldwide by 2025. From a few cartons of milk and loaves of bread stacked next to ice, the model scaled into an international standard for accessibility. It's staggering to think that a global giant was built out of such a modest change, but that is exactly why the story matters. The convenience store didn't come from corporate vision or years of planning. It came from one employee listening to customers and a leader willing to take a risk. That dynamic became part of the company's DNA, showing up over and over again in later decades. Sometimes the choices looked odd or even impractical at first, but they proved decisive once people actually experienced them. As Southland grew through the 1930s and beyond, that willingness to try unconventional ideas didn't disappear. It showed up in ways that might look surprising, even bizarre, through the lens of modern retail. Some of those decisions became forgotten chapters of the brand's history, but they reveal how experimentation quietly shaped what 7-Eleven would eventually become. The Totem store era nobody remembers. When people picture 7-Eleven today, they think of bold stripes in orange, green, and red, glowing signage, and a logo etched into memory. But if you step back into the 1930s, you would have found something that looked almost nothing like that. At the time, these stores weren't called 7-Eleven at all. They were known as Totem stores, with wooden totem poles standing outside as their most striking feature. The poles weren't chosen because they connected logically to ice or groceries. They worked because they caught the eye, and the name carried a clever double meaning. Customers could totem home. Even before flashy neon branding, the company had figured out how to advertise its new shopping idea with something simple, cheap, and impossible to miss. This was an era long before national branding campaigns or polished logos. Most businesses depended on repetition and whatever storefront presence they could create. For Southland Ice, which had only recently started dabbling in grocery staples alongside ice, the totem image gave them a way to stand out. Seeing a totem pole on a Dallas street corner instantly signaled something different. Unlike the serious grocers and markets of the 1920s and early 30s, Totem conveyed its identity with a symbol that blended playfulness with memorability. It was affordable, unconventional, and surprisingly effective against a backdrop of generic storefronts. The tactic wasn't just surface level. It aligned with the company's new promise: small, quick purchases that could be carried home without the bulk of traditional grocery shopping. In the shorthand of the name itself, the brand was teaching people the behavior of totem shopping. By design or by luck, the playful gimmick managed to express the company's purpose better than a serious corporate name might have. By 1928, Southland had already expanded beyond ice and groceries into selling gasoline, adding another layer of everyday necessity to the model. The company's willingness to explore small but bold shifts kept them current and gave them consistent opportunities to draw in new types of customers. But none of those experiments would shield them from the larger crisis that soon arrived. The Great Depression slammed into American life after 1929, and by 1931, the impact was immediate across small businesses. Families who once added extras to their shopping lists began holding off on everything non-essential. Ice sales slowed, milk and bread purchases tightened, and Southland's retail experiment faced the same strain that was crushing companies nationwide. Whatever advantage the Totem branding provided in good times, it couldn't counteract the fact that people now had less money to spend and fewer trips to make. Locations struggled to hold on, and survival became uncertain. The turning point came in 1933 with the repeal of Prohibition. Suddenly, entire categories of products that had been illegal for over a decade, beer, wine, and liquor, returned almost overnight. This wasn't just a symbolic change. It opened a flood of demand for beverages that people had been waiting years to buy freely again. And convenience shops like Totem were positioned to serve that market almost instantly. Shelves that had once held little more than bread and milk could now stock consumer favorites that attracted foot traffic in a way staples alone could not. That change didn't just lift sales out of the Depression-era slump, it reshaped what the stores were. Alcohol gave them a cultural relevance beyond practicality. They became more than a fallback stop for families who had run out of bread. They became hubs where people could pick up goods that carried enjoyment and social value. It was a substantial pivot, one that confirmed that Southland's retail arm wasn't just a passing experiment. Totem was becoming a dependable stop for almost any daily need. The marriage of unconventional branding and practical adaptation gave the company resilience during a decade when thousands of businesses folded. The goofy wooden poles may look anachronistic today, but they were enough to differentiate, while smart product expansions provided the substance. The lesson was straightforward. Attention alone isn't enough to survive, but visual hooks combined with a willingness to follow demand can form a lasting business. By the mid-1940s, the company was ready to update its identity again, and the Totem era faded. In 1946, the chain officially adopted the name 7-Eleven, a description of its hours, 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., longer than nearly any competitor at the time. The new name cast off the playful imagery of carved poles in favor of a clean promise about open doors. It was direct, functional branding, but it also captured the theme that had defined the company since Uncle Johnny's first shelves of milk, being there when people needed something most. Looking back, the Totem Stores era is mostly forgotten outside of company history, but in context, it was a critical bridge. It showed the value of unusual branding. It carried the business through the Depression by leaning on consumer demand after Prohibition ended, and it set the stage for the transition to 7-Eleven. Without that formative decade, the later brand might not have found footing at all. And while the Totem concept worked for its moment, the new name brought something even more powerful into focus. By explicitly promising extended hours, the stores tied themselves to time rather than gimmicks. That focus on availability, when others were closed, would soon push the company into an unplanned experiment that altered the future not only of 7-Eleven, but of retail as a whole. The revolutionary 24/7 gamble. Nobody at 7-Eleven ever started with a grand plan to invent round-the-clock shopping. The idea that would come to define the company across the globe began almost by accident. In the 1940s, 7-Eleven stores still kept ordinary hours, closing in the evenings the same way their competitors did. But one night, near a stadium in Dallas, that routine was interrupted. A wave of football fans poured out of a game late in the evening and headed toward a local store looking for drinks and snacks. Instead of shutting the doors and sending them away, the staff simply kept serving. Customers kept arriving, registers kept ringing, and management noticed something unusual. A single night of bending the rules hinted at a completely new way of running the business. Would you stay open if no one paid you for the extra hour? That was effectively the question the company now faced. At first, the risks felt obvious. Paying employees to stand behind a counter during the dead of night seemed unsustainable. Electricity and security cost money, and late-night hours rarely promised heavy traffic. For decades, American retailers had taught customers to shop according to store schedules. Grocery stores shut their doors before dinner, department stores closed early, and if you ran short of coffee or diapers after hours, waiting until morning was the only option. In that context, the idea of keeping a small store open all night looked impractical. But the more the team tested it, the more the pattern surprised them. Even if the flow of customers wasn't overwhelming, it was steady. And just as important, people remembered where they could turn when everyone else was closed. Eventually, this proved more valuable than simply calculating profit per hour. By the early 1960s, the experiment began to formalize. Stores in select markets tested continuous schedules, and by 1963, several pilot locations were operating 24 hours a day. This was no longer a spontaneous choice by a clerk slipping past closing. It was an intentional business model. Some nights brought only a handful of customers, but the consistency of availability built loyalty. Workers finishing factory shifts, college students studying late, travelers arriving on delayed trains, all of them began treating the store as a guarantee. The margins from each hour hardly mattered when compared with the psychological power of being reliable at any time. By staying open when others shut their doors, 7-Eleven was building a reputation stronger than any advertisement. The timing could not have been better. Post-war America was shifting its rhythms. Growing suburbs produced commuters returning late from downtown jobs. Families needed last-minute milk or medicine after kids were in bed. Service industry employees worked irregular schedules, and hospitals, airports, and factories never shut down. A store open all night became more than a novelty, it was a necessity. Customers adapted quickly, letting go of the rigid chore-like planning that earlier decades had required. Instead, they embraced the comfort of knowing they could shop when it suited them. That shift sounds minor, but at the time it was a cultural step change. Purchasing was no longer limited by the clock. In 1966, a new product sealed the connection between around-the-clock availability and cultural identity, the Slurpee. Sold straight from the machines in brightly colored cups, it gave late-night visits a signature treat. The combination of endless hours and a frozen novelty beverage tied 7-Eleven directly into youth culture and everyday rituals. Grabbing a Slurpee after school, on a summer evening, or during an overnight outing built habits among customers who now saw the chain as part of their lifestyle, not just a fallback option. The product's timing was as important as its flavor. Without 24-hour schedules already in motion, the Slurpee might have remained a passing gimmick. Instead, it became a long-running symbol of the brand. Running a store without closing also demanded new systems behind the scenes. Night shifts had to be staffed, sometimes by a single clerk under heightened security. Delivery and restocking schedules were adjusted so that supplies could be managed while business never ceased. Companies had to think through safety procedures, lighting designs, and nightly routines that balanced convenience with control. These operational details weren't glamorous, but they mattered. Without redesigning the back end of the business to accommodate non-stop use, the cultural promise of always open would have collapsed under its own inefficiency. As the model stabilized, competitors began to imitate it. Gas stations extended their pumps into 24-hour service, often stocking snacks and essentials in small attached stores inspired by 7-Eleven's template. Diners experimented with round-the-clock tables, serving night shift workers as a reliable break spot. Pharmacies extended hours to handle late-night prescriptions. What had started with one spontaneous night after a football game spread into an assumption across towns and cities. At least one place in the neighborhood should be open no matter what time you needed it. The impact extended well beyond retail schedules. For workers in transportation, healthcare, and manufacturing, access to stores at off hours carried real weight. A nurse leaving the hospital at sunrise could pick up groceries without waiting. A trucker finishing a long stretch found food and supplies during the quietest hours. Suddenly, goods were available equally to people no matter what shift they worked. Retail had bent its schedule to fit customers' lives, and for the first time itself became part of the service. Of course, keeping stores running through the night exposed them to vulnerabilities. Theft and crime posed real threats, and profitability remained thin in certain locations. Detractors inside and outside the company argued that the gamble placed unnecessary pressure on staff and budgets. Yet every calculation kept leading to the same outcome. Reliability created loyalty that far outweighed those risks. People counted on 7-Eleven in ways competitors couldn't match, and that trust was its own form of profit. Looking back, it's striking to realize how much of today's consumer culture began with that accident. Without a small Dallas store keeping its lights on for football fans, 7-Eleven might have remained a regional shop with ordinary hours. Instead, its stores broke the link between shopping and the clock, shifting how consumers thought about access itself. Convenience no longer meant being close by. It meant being available whenever you needed something. Over time, that definition spread far and wide, shaping expectations not only for corner shops, but restaurants, supermarkets, pharmacies, and eventually digital businesses offering 24/7 online access. Today, the idea feels ordinary because it won, but it won because a company committed to an experiment most of its peers thought was wasteful. The gamble of always staying open changed how Americans lived daily life, then spread outward as other countries adopted the same expectations. It wasn't polished strategy or corporate vision that triggered the change. It was flexibility in the moment, and a willingness to let the outcome reshape the entire model. By the mid-20th century, 7-Eleven had succeeded in rewriting the rules of consumer access. But while the idea of 24/7 convenience feels like an American invention burned into neon lights, the next chapter of the company's story reveals a different driver altogether, one that would carry the brand far beyond its origins and into the worldwide dominance it enjoys today. Global giant, Japanese engine. For most people, 7-Eleven still feels like an American original. The glowing stripes, the all-night hot dogs, and the iconic Slurpee seem woven into U.S. culture. But the reality behind the brand's survival and explosive growth is unexpected. The company's true center of power has shifted thousands of miles away, and for decades, its engine has been located not in Texas but in Tokyo. What began as an American invention became a Japanese-driven system that kept the brand alive after its collapse at home. By the late 1980s, the U.S. parent company, Southland Corporation, was drowning in debt. Aggressive expansion, especially into non-core ventures, left the business overstretched just as competition sharpened. The situation collapsed into bankruptcy in 1990. That's when a Japanese partner, Ito Yokado, stepped in. What had started as a licensing deal for a handful of stores in Japan turned into something far larger. In 1991, Ito Yakato and an affiliate took a 70% controlling stake in 7-Eleven's American operations. From that moment, the old power dynamic flipped. Tokyo now had the reins. Later, in 2005, through the formation of 7&I Holdings, the Japanese parent acquired full ownership. The company the world still viewed as a U.S. icon was now directed entirely from Japan. What Japan built in those decades was more than a bailout. It was a re-engineering of the business model itself. The Japanese system didn't just copy packaged American snacks or roll out big gulps in Tokyo. Instead, 7-Eleven Japan recast the concept into something closer to a living part of everyday life. Stores became hubs defined by exceptional freshness, hyper-precise supply chains, and a near-obsessive responsiveness to local shopping behavior. The contrast with the U.S. model was stark. In Japan, food wasn't treated as something to sit on shelves for days. Instead, deliveries arrived multiple times per day. Careful rotation kept shelves filled with rice balls, sandwiches, noodles, and fully prepared meals. Inventory was constantly refreshed to guarantee that what customers grabbed at 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. felt made for today. Each store carried smaller quantities but turned them over quickly, creating a steady rhythm of newness that reset customer expectations. Over time, 7-Eleven Japan trained an entire market to expect convenience stores to sell trustworthy, ready-to-eat meals, something unheard of in the gas station, shops most Americans were familiar with. Behind the fresh food was an infrastructure that quietly set global standards. Data collection and point-of-sale systems became central decades before many U.S. competitors caught on. Franchisees uploaded real-time sales and customer behavior into shared networks. An algorithmically supported system predicted neighborhood-level demand and adjusted orders overnight. If a cluster of stores saw a sudden spike in one drink flavor, the next morning's delivery reflected it. This wasn't the wholesale cycle of American stores that stocked generic goods on bulk schedules. It was an agile, adaptive system that shaved waste and matched supply with minute-by-minute shifts in preference. Condensing the impact, the Japanese model perfected three things at once: frequent, fresh deliveries, predictive ordering powered by technology, and disciplined supply chain coordination. These elements operated together in a way the U.S. side simply could not achieve on its own. What looked like quirky cultural differences from the outside were actually structural advantages. Data and delivery made convenience more personal, fresher, and more profitable. The system later influenced the U.S. operation, but at the time, it represented a wholesale reversal of who was leading whom. Support for franchise operators reinforced the consistency. In Japan, store owners received comprehensive training and tools, making them full participants in the finely tuned model rather than isolated middlemen. American franchises often fought bitter disputes over rights and royalties. On the other side of the Pacific, headquarters streamlined operations so that individual managers could focus on meeting local habits. That combination of discipline and flexibility made Japanese stores consistent nationwide, but still felt tailored block by block. For consumers used to tightly packed urban living, this reliability paired with a sense of care mattered deeply, and brand loyalty grew stronger as a result. The results became obvious by the early 2000s. In metrics and in scale, Japan was no longer a branch of the 7-Eleven system. It had become the system. 7-Eleven Japan didn't just dominate its home market, it also turned the global chain profitable. By the time 7&I Holdings completed its takeover in 2005, the message was undeniable. If America had invented the convenience store, Japan had perfected it. And size mattered. Today, Japan has the largest national share of 7-Eleven locations anywhere, over 21,600 stores, nearly a quarter of the global total. That density illustrates how deeply convenience stores are integrated into Japanese daily life, from morning commutes to late-night study sessions. To walk through a city block in Tokyo is to see 3 or 4 outlets in easy sight, each busy not only selling snacks, but offering services ranging from bill payment to package pickup. This ubiquity created a template that the company later carried into other countries. The irony deepens when you consider the brand's image. Walk into a US 7-Eleven today, and you'll see products that owe their design directly to Japanese methods. Refrigerated meal boxes, on-demand coffee grinding stations, rice bowls stacked alongside roller hot dogs. For many American customers, it feels like a natural progression. But that freshness and variety would never have emerged out of the original US supply chain. The systems that made it possible were built half a world away and imported back into the country that thought it owned the brand. Customers rarely notice the distinction. To the average shopper grabbing coffee on the way to work, the store simply functions. Few realize that the reliability of a Dallas shop at 2 a.m. reflects data collected, processed, and modeled by teams in Japan. They don't know that their sandwich was stocked thanks to daily ordering cycles refined overseas decades ago. The public identity remains culturally American because the signs, branding, and slogans never changed. But beneath those surfaces, the practical operations, from deliveries to product development, carry a Japanese fingerprint. Culturally, Japan also demonstrated what the convenience store could mean beyond snacks. In the United States, people often joke about gas station food. In Japan, that association doesn't exist. Their 7-Eleven is trusted for quick but fresh meals eaten daily. That divergence shows the power of management priorities. What is dismissed in one country as low quality thrives elsewhere as a valued daily staple. Without the shift in leadership, 7-Eleven might have deteriorated like so many other mid-century chains. Instead, it found new life bridging cultural expectations across continents. This raises ongoing questions about identity. Is 7-Eleven an American product with Japanese management, or a Japanese enterprise wrapped in American branding? From a customer standpoint, the question hardly matters. The experience is seamless. But inside the industry, Japan's ownership is recognized as the turning point that transformed a fading U.S. company into a global benchmark. Today's profitability and reach exist not because of Dallas, but because of the decisions made in Tokyo boardrooms decades ago. By 2025, those systems remain in place and continue expanding. Fresh food still anchors operations in Japan, and that template has spread to urban U.S. markets and far beyond. Global executives rely on supply chains built to 7-Eleven Japan standards. Adaptability isn't just a slogan, it's a core function written into daily logistics. As the company opens stores in new countries, the Japanese model provides the framework for making them work. That is why the story is so unusual. Brands typically expand by exporting their original model outward and teaching franchises abroad how to replicate it. In this case, the direction reversed. The student became the teacher. An American creation was saved, strengthened, and globalized by Japanese control. America provided the symbol, but Japan provided the system. Which leads to the next question. If Japan became the engine that rebuilt and expanded the brand, how did that influence the company's ability to spread across the world? The answer lies in the strategy 7-Eleven adopted to keep opening stores in place after place, not with fanfare, but with quiet consistency, until suddenly it was everywhere. Expansion without borders. Expansion on this scale does not happen by accident. What looks from the outside like a chain gradually appearing everywhere is in fact the result of a very deliberate strategy. 7-Eleven today manages one of the world's largest retail footprints, over 85,000 stores across 20 countries as of 2025, with stated goals of reaching 100,000 outlets by 2030. This kind of growth isn't driven by splashy marketing or headline-making launches. It comes from a quieter model built on adaptability, measured risk, and constant recalibration. At the core of this international strategy is the framework laid out by 7&i Holdings, the Japanese parent that now directs global operations. Their growth approach rests on three interlocking pillars: close support for licensees and franchisees, targeted investments in new territories, and steady expansion into fresh markets. Instead of forcing every region to conform to a single template, the company emphasizes customization. Products, payment systems, and even store layouts are adapted until they feel completely natural within each country's culture. This hyperlocal philosophy has been the defining trait of why the chain continues to root itself into daily life worldwide. You can see this most clearly across Asia. In South Korea, for instance, 7-Eleven became embedded in everyday routines not by pushing American-style hot dogs and fountain drinks, but by tailoring its shelves to Korean habits. Shoppers could find warm rice bowls, packaged stews, and local desserts arranged next to international items. That helped transform the stores from a place for snacks into a destination for actual meals. In Thailand, a similar pattern played out, with familiar curries, sticky rice, and local drink flavors on offer. The power of this approach was that it did not ask consumers to change their habits. It met them exactly where they already were. Contrast that with the story of Indonesia, a country 7-Eleven entered in 2009. At first, the format created excitement, particularly among young urban customers, but long-term viability proved fragile. Average spending per visit was low, and in 2015, new restrictions on alcohol sales stripped away some of the chain's most profitable categories. Without a strong cultural anchor to lean on, and competing directly with established local shops, growth slowed sharply. By 2017, all Indonesian 7-Eleven stores shut down. Instead of clinging to the market, the company withdrew, treating the closure not as a failure, but as a lesson in how regulation and consumer spending habits set hard limits on adaptability. Europe provides another kind of test case. Countries like Norway, Denmark, and Sweden saw earlier expansions that gained traction, but recent moves have shifted to a more experimental pace. Instead of rolling out hundreds of stores at once, the company has allowed regional partners to test formats with localized product mixes. A 7-Eleven in Copenhagen is not trying to mimic Tokyo or Dallas. Instead, it looks and feels closer to a local cafe, offering breads, pastries, and coffee that echo existing Danish routines. By fitting into what already feels normal, the brand avoids the resistance often aimed at foreign entrants in European markets. This adaptability is expensive and complex to maintain. Supply chains must be structured at a local level while still tied into a global backbone. Different parts of the world also use different payment preferences, from cash-heavy systems to advanced mobile platforms. Adjusting store design, staffing patterns, and product inventory country by country requires constant attention. But 7-Eleven leans on clustering stores densely within urban regions to balance these costs. When numerous outlets share logistics, restocking, and distribution, the entire system becomes more efficient, and each location contributes to the resilience of the broader network. Failures like Indonesia demonstrate the tightrope the company walks, but they also highlight its pragmatic attitude. Many competitors avoid withdrawing for fear of losing face once they've entered a market. 7-Eleven treats exits as strategic resets, unwilling to keep bleeding resources where cultural fit is weak. That flexibility, the same mindset that encouraged product experimentation back in the days of ice blocks and milk cartons, still defines the company's ability to grow without collapsing under its own scale. Another reason for this steady expansion is how naturally it plugs into evolving social structures. In Japan and Thailand, increasingly smaller households mean more individuals buying meals one serving at a time. In South Korea, hectic student and work cultures keep people out long into the night. 7-Eleven does not try to impose foreign routines onto these populations. Instead, it makes itself indispensable by solving problems already present in society. That is why young professionals in Seoul stopping for late dinners, or Tokyo commuters grabbing breakfast on the go, see the stores less as retail curiosities and more as part of their daily fabric. By 2025, the scope of the rollout is staggering. With over 85,000 outlets and a clear roadmap to 100,000, 7-Eleven has one of the largest live networks of retail space under a single brand anywhere in the world. North America continues to evolve as prepared meals make the stores more relevant. Asia remains the anchor with the highest density of locations. And new trials in European markets seek to introduce the concept carefully, without signaling cultural overreach. The goal is not uniformity. The goal is presence that feels so natural people no longer identify it as foreign. The distinction with how other global names grow becomes obvious. Chains like Starbucks often announce each new location as a measure of cultural reach. 7-Eleven does the opposite. Its style of expansion is deliberately quiet. Stores appear in clusters until they become ordinary street furniture, fixtures you stop consciously noticing but use daily. There is no flash, no public countdown, no campaigns emphasizing arrival. The arrival is simply the fact that doors are open, meals are on shelves, and people begin treating them as part of their day before they've noticed the shift. And yet this invisibility is the strength of the model. Marketing is inherent in the presence itself. When a corner shop solves late-night hunger or enables quick bill payment, word of mouth spreads faster than any corporate slogan. Customers adjust without thinking, the real test of cultural adoption. Hyper-local differences hide behind a consistent global brand name, creating the illusion of uniformity while operating a highly flexible framework beneath. That ability to be both global and invisible explains why the chain has endured through setbacks and surges of growth. 7-Eleven's future growth remains tied to this balance of central scale and local adaptation. The company does not need every experiment to succeed. It only needs enough footholds in enough societies to keep momentum going. With a target of 100,000 locations less than a decade away, the expansion will continue to feel understated, even as its scale surpasses most global competitors. The ambition isn't to dominate headlines, it's to dominate habits. That persistence raises a final question. Sustaining tens of thousands of outlets in dozens of countries requires more than just local menu tweaks and clever franchising. It also depends on new systems that can keep stores efficient, connected, and attractive, even as consumer expectations shift quickly. And it is here, behind the counter and in the logistics networks, that another unexpected side of 7-Eleven begins to emerge. The tech-powered store of the future. When most people picture 7-Eleven, they think of the same old features: neon lights, racks of chips, pizza slices under glass, and endless soda refills. At first glance, nothing seems to change. Yet the company has quietly transformed itself into one of the most tech-forward retailers in the world. What looks ordinary from the outside is, in practice, a massive testing ground for new technologies guiding how convenience stores will function in the decades ahead. And this shift hasn't come with Silicon Valley fanfare or flashy press events. It has unfolded gradually, becoming stitched into the habits of buying coffee, grabbing breakfast, or ordering delivery through an app. One of the clearest examples is 7NOW, the company's digital delivery platform. First launched in 2017, 7NOW has grown rapidly. By early 2025, the service operates through thousands of stores in North America and generated targets approaching $1 billion in sales. The appeal comes down to speed. Orders for snacks, drinks, and convenience items arrive in an average of about 28 minutes, according to coverage by C-Store Dive. That number matters. A customer who runs out of ice cream late at night knows replacements will arrive faster than a typical grocery delivery service could manage. What once meant a trip to a corner shop at midnight is now just a tap on a screen away. Alongside delivery, mobile ordering and app integration became core features within regular operations. Long before many restaurants or grocers streamlined their systems, 7-Eleven allowed customers to order items online for pickup or delivery. By 2025, the app is inseparable from the physical store. Someone can order milk and snacks through 7NOW while still relying on a local shop for spontaneous visits. What emerges is not two separate channels, but a blended experience where the store becomes both an in-person stop and a digital hub. Cashless systems reinforce that shift. In markets like Japan and South Korea, where digital wallets became dominant, the stores pioneered QR payments, NFC card systems, and app-based checkout methods years before their competitors caught up. For customers, the change felt seamless: scan, pay, exit. Behind the counter, however, 7-Eleven was building one of the most adaptive payment ecosystems in retail. Suburban American outlets absorbed those lessons in the years after the pandemic, when contactless transactions surged. What might seem like a minor adjustment, scanning a phone instead of swiping a card, was actually proof that the company could pivot across cultures without slowing down. At the same time, pressure from Amazon raised unavoidable questions about the future of retail. When Amazon introduced checkout-free stores powered by sensors and AI, it set the benchmark for what frictionless shopping could look like. On paper, 7-Eleven's model looked outdated in comparison. But instead of copying Amazon outright, 7-Eleven took a hybrid approach. They added automation without discarding tradition. A pilot cashierless store opened in 2020 at the company's Irving, Texas headquarters, testing whether the technology could function in a convenience setting. From there, the company extended trials across North America and Asia, experimenting with variations such as AI-assisted self-checkout and app-based mobile checkout. By not leaning on a single solution, the chain avoided overpromising. In some locations, customers can pay at kiosks. In others, they can scan items with their phones and check out instantly. A few select pilot sites allow customers to walk out without going to a counter at all, charged automatically through the app. Yet in the same spaces, a teenager buying soda at 11 p.m. can still hand over cash to a clerk. This mixture reflects an intentional balancing act. The stores preserve their identity as approachable neighborhood stops, while gradually layering in futuristic tools. This strategy extends beyond checkout. Logistics and inventory management have become core areas of technological innovation. Using AI-driven systems, 7-Eleven predicts which products will sell, when they should be restocked, and how distribution networks should adjust to keep perishable goods fresh. Unlike traditional grocers tied to weekly resupply cycles, many locations now receive multiple deliveries in a single day, guaranteeing fresher stock while reducing waste. These techniques reflect systems perfected in Japan and duplicated worldwide. On the surface, you see shelves refilled. Underneath, the process is powered by data forecasting at a scale few retailers can match. The pandemic accelerated this experimentation. Health concerns pushed demand for contactless orders, rapid fulfillment, and safe pickup. 7-Eleven leaned on this urgency to highlight digital loyalty programs, app-based coupons, and location-driven offers. Stores evolved into nodes in a larger network, serving both traditional counter sales and the data-rich infrastructure of online retail. A neighborhood convenience store, once defined by its square footage, now functions as a miniature logistics hub linking physical shelves to an entire digital marketplace. What makes this model effective is its scalability. Amazon Go may feel futuristic, but expanding thousands of sensor-heavy outlets is slow and difficult. 7-Eleven, in contrast, already had tens of thousands of stores. By applying layers of technology across the existing network, it transformed overnight from a traditional chain into a hybrid system. By 2023, corporate investments signaled just how serious the global approach had become. A full app overhaul, continued expansion of the 7NOW platform, and even the launch of the 7Charge EV charging network to connect convenience retail with mobility infrastructure. These initiatives reinforce a broader point. The brand's vision of technology is not centered on one flagship idea, but on many smaller, integrated updates. Tokyo offers a clear example. Certain outlets there test checkout-free technologies, while still processing utility bill payments and ATM transactions. The design demonstrates that future-forward technology can coexist with older, trusted services under one roof. In Dallas, pilot programs around mobile ordering and curbside pickups sit alongside soda refills and roller grills. The stores adapt incrementally, shaped around local behavior, rather than a single rigid model of the future. That flexibility across locations explains how the chain continues to scale while still feeling familiar in every market. Technology also addresses another challenge: labor. With global staffing shortages and rising costs, reducing dependency on cashiers has practical benefits. Self-checkout kiosks, app scans, and even cashierless pilots lighten the workload for employees while cutting operational expenses. Machine learning systems fine-tune promotions, recommend restocks, and even assist in rotating seasonal flavors of Slurpees. Each efficiency may look small individually, but when multiplied across 85,000 outlets, the aggregate impact rivals any dramatic innovation that competitors market loudly. By aligning technology with nostalgia rather than replacing it, the company has avoided alienating its base. Customers still connect the brand with everyday experiences, picking up snacks after school, stopping for coffee before work, grabbing a quick dinner on the go. These images endure while the technical systems operate quietly in the background. Unlike Amazon Go, which defines itself through futuristic novelty, 7-Eleven emphasizes familiarity with an added layer of speed and ease. Customers trust the brand not because its stores feel like labs, but because the experience hasn't lost its human scale. This hybrid strategy has created momentum. In some cases, customers zip through a purchase without seeing a clerk. In others, they count on face-to-face interaction while redeeming an app coupon. The central promise is not erasing checkout, but offering multiple paths that reflect how people actually shop. That adaptability, incremental, quiet, and broad, has become the brand's greatest competitive weapon. By 2025, 7-Eleven's future-facing systems do not stand out because they look radically different, but because customers barely notice the difference as they adopt them. All of this points to a deeper truth. The future of 7-Eleven isn't in building sleek, experimental flagships. It is in upgrading the familiar infrastructure already scattered across streets around the world. Each store becomes smarter without losing its older role in community life. For customers, the effect is invisible. For the company, it is transformative. That contrast explains why 7-Eleven has emerged as a quiet leader in retail innovation, advancing without ever abandoning the look and feel of the neighborhood shop. But even as these systems reshape how customers buy their snacks and coffee, a separate story unfolds right behind the front doors. Because there is one element of 7-Eleven that technology doesn't reveal, and most customers never realize: the question of who actually owns the store in their neighborhood. Who really owns your neighborhood? 7-Eleven. Walk into a 7-Eleven and everything looks unified. The same green and orange logo beams above the door, the Slurpee machine hums in the corner, and the aisles feel nearly identical whether you are in Dallas, Tokyo, or Bangkok. But behind this surface consistency lies a complicated reality. The store down the street probably isn't company-owned at all. It is operated by an independent franchisee, bound by contracts and expectations that shape every decision made inside. This franchise structure is not unusual in American business. McDonald's, Subway, and countless other chains use the same model. An entrepreneur buys into the system, gets access to corporate branding and logistics, and pays royalties in return. What makes 7-Eleven different is the degree of control exerted by the corporate office. Franchise owners enter agreements that specify suppliers, prices, promotions, staffing expectations, and even opening hours. The governance structure isn't uniform globally. Rules and royalty percentages vary country by country depending on local laws and market conditions. But the principle remains: Branding consistency is guarded by contracts that limit individual freedom. For some owners, this feels like invaluable support. For others, it feels like suffocation. Corporate leadership argues that this strict model is essential. Customers expect a store in Chicago to mirror one in Los Angeles or Tokyo. Coffee should taste the same, the checkout process should feel familiar, and the stores should present the same recognizable face. Without uniformity, the trust in the brand would fracture. But franchisees often see the arrangements differently. They argue that the royalty fees are heavy, the constant surveillance of operations erodes autonomy, and that they shoulder the financial risks while corporate reaps the steady benefits. What looks like a partnership on paper sometimes feels more like rented employment. This tension has surfaced repeatedly in controversies around the world. In the United States, franchise associations have filed lawsuits claiming head office imposes obligations that make stores unprofitable. These disputes often focus on mandatory 24-hour schedules, which some operators argue force them to staff uneconomical shifts. In Australia, the disagreements became a national scandal. Investigations revealed widespread underpayment of workers at franchise stores, resulting in 7-Eleven paying $173 million in back wages. That was followed by a separate class action settlement, in which franchisees received about $98 million, claiming that the economic model itself stacked the financial deck against them. These cases revealed how fragile the balance between corporate oversight and local independence can be. The disputes don't end with wages or fees. Labor laws in different regions create conflicting demands. In places with strong minimum wage rules, franchisees complain they cannot meet both corporate targets and government standards. In markets with weaker regulation, workers sometimes endure long hours with little protection. The franchise owner becomes the pressure point, caught between government requirements on one side and corporate policies on the other. The result is exhaustion. Many owners work full-time shifts themselves, not only to save on staffing but to keep stores afloat. Headquarters counters by pointing to the benefits they provide. Franchisees gain access to global advertising muscle, supply chains of unprecedented efficiency, and advanced technology, things few small entrepreneurs could assemble on their own. They receive training, corporate support, and the power to trade under one of the most recognizable retail names on earth. In many cases, these tools do help local operators succeed in competitive markets. The problem is that the balance never feels neutral. What corporate views as support, franchisees often experience as control. What corporate presence as predictable royalties, owners experience as financial suffocation. By 2025, these tensions persist and arguably intensify. They reflect deeper questions shaping the global economy. How much risk should fall on individuals, and how much control should corporations exercise when their scale depends on thousands of small operators? The analogy to the gig economy is obvious. Uber drivers complain they carry risks without benefits. Many 7-Eleven franchisees say the same. They aren't traditional employees, but they also aren't fully independent. They live in between, part entrepreneurs and part satellite labor. Customers remain largely unaware of this tug-of-war because storefronts look seamless. When you buy a drink or a sandwich, you don't see whether the revenue is flowing upward to corporate accounts or sideways to cover a local family's debt. You don't see the contracts mandating prices, dictating suppliers, or requiring 24-hour schedules regardless of demand. The public is shielded by polished branding that conceals the instability behind it. Despite lawsuits, settlements, and bitter disputes, the system sustains itself because both parties depend on it. Corporate cannot operate 85,000 stores directly on its own balance sheet. Franchisees benefit from the brand identity, advertising, and supply chains. Each side resents aspects of the arrangement, but neither can fully function without the other. That interdependence explains why, even with scandals like the Australian wage investigation or recurring lawsuits in the US, the model persists. This creates a kind of invisibility. The debates are loud in boardrooms and courtrooms, but silent in everyday life. A 7-Eleven looks the same whether its operator is thriving or quietly drowning in royalties and debts. The tension is absorbed into the system. Customers continue flowing in, seeking coffee, snacks, or late-night essentials, unaware that their small transaction may be sustaining an owner working overtime under the weight of obligations. The paradox is simple. The thing that makes 7-Eleven powerful, the ability to be everywhere at once, is also what makes its franchise system fragile. Spreading across 20 countries and tens of thousands of outlets requires rules and oversight, but those rules often clash with the independence franchisees hope for when investing in the business. That conflict, unresolved after decades, remains one of the most defining yet least visible realities of the chain. From the outside, none of this is obvious. customers think they are walking into a stable corporate fixture. In reality, each shop is a carefully negotiated agreement locked by contracts, shaped by lawsuits, and underpinned by a constant debate about who truly owns the business. It is an unseen battle sitting beneath the glow of a corner store sign. And while ownership questions remain contentious, the company has been forced to grapple with other shocks that test both corporate systems and local operators. One of the largest came recently, shaking the very foundations of foot traffic retail and forcing even the most established franchises to find new ways of surviving. The post-pandemic survival playbook. When the pandemic arrived, convenience retail was forced into a stress test few had imagined. Stores that relied on spontaneous foot traffic suddenly saw those patterns vanish. Customers weren't stopping in on commutes, grabbing snacks after school, or picking up drinks on the way home. The entire flow of impulse-driven shopping collapsed in weeks. For a company long built on being present wherever people moved, the disruption cut directly at the foundation of daily operations. The immediate response was to accelerate digital access. 7-Eleven began scaling its proprietary 7 Now delivery app, first launched in 2017, and locked in partnerships with major delivery networks like DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, and Instacart. Suddenly, items once tied to fluorescent-lit shelves, Slurpees, hot food, cartons of milk, appeared as digital menu options. By early 2025, 7 Now was active in thousands of stores across North America and was projected to hit $1 billion in sales. The platform's defining feature was speed. Average delivery times landed at about 28 minutes, according to C-Store Dive. That number kept 7-Eleven in the running as the store for instant needs, regardless of whether people were mobile or confined at home. Product strategies shifted as well. Instead of relying only on fountain drinks and roller grill meals, locations leaned on refrigerated ready-to-eat sections, expanded frozen items, and single-serve packaged meals that traveled easily by courier. Curbside pickup pilots were tested as life under restrictions demanded contactless options. These moves blurred the line between in-store service and online delivery, while giving customers safer ways to access staples. Initial adjustments were seen as temporary. In practice, they became blueprints for a new hybrid model. The shift exposed another structural challenge: impulse buying. Traditionally, a customer who came in for bread might leave with coffee, candy, or a soda spotted near the register. On an app, those visual prompts disappear. Shopping lists are reduced to searchable grids, stripping away the element of surprise. For 7-Eleven, this meant rethinking one of its core revenue drivers. In response, the company pushed digital nudges through notifications, personalized queries, and small-time offers embedded in apps. Instead of relying solely on product placement near counters, it engineered impulsive moments on screen. This strategic pivot extended into how stores themselves were defined. Rather than functioning only as front-facing shops, 7-Eleven began explicitly treating each location as a neighborhood fulfillment hub, a phrase corporate leaders used to describe their doubled role. Stockrooms and counters now serve both walk-in visitors and bundled app orders assembled for couriers. Staff schedules were revised around processing mobile orders alongside in-person transactions. Compact storage coolers were rearranged to prioritize items like fresh meals and snacks ordered repeatedly online. On the customer side, the change looked fluid. On the employee side, it meant reorganizing workflow to merge traditional retail with rapid micro-distribution. The existing scale made this possible. With tens of thousands of outlets already embedded in urban cores and suburban intersections, the chain didn't need sprawling warehouses to achieve last-mile delivery. It simply leveraged its existing footprint. Unlike larger retailers scrambling to retrofit regional warehouses for consumer shipping, 7-Eleven converted corner stores into dual-purpose assets. This practical use of geography, where nearly every shop doubled as a local hub, was one of the company's clearest survival advantages during lockdown years. Consumers adjusted quickly. A movie night could now include ice cream ordered online and delivered within a half hour. Remote workers could use apps to keep caffeine flowing during back-to-back virtual meetings. Residents isolating indoors still turned to the familiar brand for essentials, with couriers acting as a bridge. The physical store didn't vanish, but its role expanded in ways invisible to most users. Throughout this period, relevance wasn't lost. It was rerouted through quiet back channels of storage rooms and delivery drivers. By 2025, the system has stabilized into a hybrid identity. Stores continue to welcome midnight walk-ins, but they also function as digital dispatch points. One location can still sell gum to a teenager at the counter while simultaneously sending a breakfast order to a courier 10 blocks away. The same square footage now carries two distinct purposes, integrating digital behaviors without discarding the original role. Few retailers of its scale adapted with such fluidity. Digital loyalty programs became another crucial layer. Rather than treat apps as only a delivery platform, 7-Eleven used them to build direct consumer habits. Push alerts reminded users of late-night availability, time-sensitive coupons encouraged repeat ordering, and small incentives kept the cycle active. In essence, the company translated shelf-level temptations into algorithm-driven nudges. Even without the sensory cues of hot dogs on rollers or energy drinks glowing under refrigerators, the psychological effect translated through phones. This demonstrated an important truth about human patterns. Customer cravings and late-night decisions didn't vanish under lockdown, they shifted platforms. The role of convenience stayed constant but migrated to screens. 7-Eleven's recognition of this transition allowed it to adapt quickly, treating impulse as a mindset rather than a physical detail in aisle presentation. By embedding itself into app-driven contexts, the brand avoided becoming forgettable. The adjustments also gave the company competitive leverage. Tech-first delivery firms like Instacart or DoorDash didn't have physical footprints. Supermarkets with legacy systems couldn't deliver in under 30 minutes. 7-Eleven, anchored by 85,000 outlets worldwide, managed to straddle both spaces. Its storefronts acted as visible fixtures, but its apps and fulfillment tools projected it into digital marketplaces. Few other chains operated at scale both physically and digitally with such synchronization. Streamlined operations supported the shift without overwhelming location staff. Rather than building extensive new infrastructure, stores layered tasks into existing workflows. Clerks prepped courier bags alongside ringing up local customers. Curbside collection was handled with basic setups rather than major redesigns. Adjustments weren't sleek, but they were efficient. By compressing change into adaptable routines, the company avoided the pitfalls that stalked larger retailers trying to overhaul entire facilities at once. In practical terms, the payoff for franchise locations was continued footfall plus added flows from digital platforms. Even though walk-in impulse losses hurt, they were offset by the consistency of online orders. A family no longer in store at night might still tap the 7NOW app for late delivery. That crossover kept stores visible and necessary, ensuring long-term survival rather than collapse. By now, the model has defined what post-pandemic convenience retail looks like. One building serving both as an accessible corner shop and a logistics node for ultra-short delivery. It is a dual identity few consumers consciously notice, but which anchors the brand within both urban streets and mobile apps. This blend explains why the company continues to compete in a crowded field, long after other mid-century chains fell away. The outcome is simple but profound. 7-Eleven didn't discard its familiar framework, it upgraded it. Stores remained recognizable while systems underneath changed. The bright counters and glowing signs still feel unchanged to a passerby, but each outlet is now plugged into a delivery pipeline as sophisticated as any designed by specialized e-commerce operators. The perception of sameness masks an internal reinvention. That reinvention doesn't answer every challenge, but it clears one hurdle, the survival test of a global lockdown. The question now is how this same adaptability might confront the next wave of consumer expectations. Because in 2025, customers no longer see convenience as just speed or access. They now attach it to how responsibly a company operates, raising a new kind of demand that 7-Eleven must decide whether it can meet. Green Slurpees and future competition. In 2025, younger customers don't define convenience only as speed or simple access. They also expect the brands they support to show some responsibility for the environment. For a chain built on single-use packaging and fluorescent signage, that expectation introduces a new kind of pressure. A company that grew famous for oversized drinks in plastic cups now faces direct questions from shoppers about carbon footprints and whether the containers piling up in their bins at home can be reused or recycled. 7-Eleven's leadership has acknowledged this shift publicly. The group's Green Challenge 2050 commits to cutting store-related CO2 emissions by half by 2030, supported by investment in energy management systems, LED lighting, and more efficient refrigeration units. On a store-by-store level, each upgrade looks small, but across tens of thousands of outlets, the cumulative change is significant. For example, automated refrigeration systems reduce wasted energy created by doors left open and overchilled sections. LED conversions lower electricity use while brightening aisles. A few stores have experimented with solar power integration, but the chain's main effort lies in scaling proven efficiency improvements across the largest possible base. Packaging has become the most visible test. Few objects are more recognizable than a Slurpee cup or the dome lid of a soda fountain, but their visibility also makes them obvious targets in the debate about waste. In 2024, the company highlighted a concrete change, redesigned 7 select replenish bottles that cut more than 100 metric tons of plastic per year. Other pilot projects replaced lids and straws with recyclable materials and introduced reusable cup programs, particularly in Japan and Australia, where government regulation and consumer demand are strongest. Small efforts like paper straws or compostable bowls may not erase the problem, but they represent measurable experiments to see what customers will accept without losing brand familiarity. Food offerings are another entry point. With plant-based diets tied closely to environmental values, 7-Eleven has expanded vegan and vegetarian options in several regions. Some Asian markets now sell plant-based meals alongside bento boxes and noodles, while North American stores have tested vegan hot dogs and dairy-free creamers. The goal isn't to make every menu item sustainable, but to ensure that convenience includes choices that satisfy climate-conscious shoppers without changing the essence of the business. These steps fit into a pattern of incremental adjustment. Corporate reports highlight reduced emissions, lower energy use, and packaging redesigns, while local markets test meatless food or reusable container pilots. Yet the strategy has limits. Advocates for deeper reform argue that a few redesigned plastic bottles or LED retrofits cannot offset the vast footprint of daily deliveries, disposable wrappers, and refrigerated logistics. They call the move surface level, adequate for headlines, but not for the scale of change required. For long-term credibility, critics insist that the company must address its entire supply chain and commit to larger renewable transitions, not just visible tweaks. Even philanthropy enters into the conversation about corporate image. In 2024, 7-Eleven reported raising millions for children's hospitals through its partnership with the Children's Miracle Network, a fact the company uses to underscore community impact. But framing this alongside environmental moves raises questions. Does goodwill offset the waste tied to single-use containers? For some customers, social contributions add balance. For others, they look like distractions. What matters most is whether environmental responsibility is woven into daily shopping experiences, not just into annual reports. The challenge grows sharper because competitors have clearer positioning. Smaller specialty chains, particularly in urban centers, are experimenting with waste-free models, bulk bins, reusable containers, and minimal packaging. They build their entire identity around environmental trust, attracting younger shoppers who actively look for sustainability. On the global stage, technology-driven rivals also push green narratives. Amazon, through its Go-format stores and broader logistics network, emphasizes efficiency and has pledged to reduce packaging waste across its ecosystem. Delivery-first dark store operators promote streamlined, low-waste fulfillment systems. For 7-Eleven, which still projects images of plastic cups filled with neon frozen drinks, the contrast can make it look outdated. Management's approach remains careful. Executives weigh how far to push change without disrupting brand comfort. More durable packaging materials are tested, but only rolled out if they don't undermine the customer experience. New energy systems arrive market by market, not all at once. Food innovation expands gradually rather than with sweeping menu changeovers. This measured process reflects how the company has always grown, by folding in experiments until they feel routine rather than revolutionizing overnight. To supporters, it shows discipline and stability. To critics, it shows hesitation. The outcome depends on consumer perception, whether gradual improvement feels like credible progress or like resistance packaged as reform. Slurpee Cup symbolizes this tension. It is both an anchor of nostalgia and the most obvious emblem of single-use waste. A redesigned recyclable version could allow the brand to keep its cultural icon intact while avoiding criticism. Failure to adapt, however, risks turning the cup into a shorthand for environmental neglect. In that sense, the company's sustainability future hinges less on emission targets buried in reports and more on the tangible items consumers throw away daily. Implications go beyond recycling bins. Customers increasingly place brand loyalty at the intersection of convenience, price, and responsibility. If buying a drink feels casual but carries visible waste, guilt creeps into the decision. If the brand provides packaging that aligns with environmental values, the small reassurance strengthens loyalty. This psychological calculation may determine how resilient a nostalgic brand can be when newer competitors emphasize sustainability first. Ultimately, 7-Eleven operates in a space where transformation cannot happen without risk. Move too quickly and beloved routines break. Move too slowly and relevance fades. By leaning on gradual shifts, the chain is attempting to balance familiarity with responsibility. It believes customers want food, drinks, and service that feel the same as they always have, just with less visible harm. Whether that is enough will depend on expectations in the years ahead, as consumer pressure on all retailers grows harsher. Which leaves an open question. If a global empire built on cups, wrappers, and signs adapts only step by step, can it stay ahead of rivals designing for a waste-conscious world from the beginning? That tension doesn't resolve here. It is the uncertainty that defines where the company stands today. And it circles back to a broader truth. Survival has always depended less on playing by established rules and more on knowing when to break them. 7-Eleven's story isn't just about Slurpees or late-night snacks. It's about using constant experimentation, franchising, 24/7 hours, Japan's turnaround, and digital delivery to build resilience where other retailers stalled. The result speaks for itself. By 2025, the chain operates more than 85,000 stores worldwide, a scale rooted in adaptability rather than a single defining product. So here's the question for you. What long-standing rule in your own life might be worth rethinking? Let me know in the comments. And if you learned something from this story, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more.